Dave, you and I were talking about life kind of in Europe and Christian associates and 37 churches and 17 countries, and what are you learning? We've been doing a lot of thinking about how, as foreign missionaries, as one's kind of parachuting into a new land, and all the cross-cultural learning and adaptation you got to do, language learning in lots of cases, and how donors are back in the United States wanting to hear how things are going, and it drives you to start church. Whether it's organic church, formal church, simple church, fluid church, who cares? But you gotta start church, and you're feeling insecure about yourself, and so you do. You've built some relationships, and you start gathering some people together, and somebody breaks out a guitar, and you prepare a message, and you do church. And that has not advanced the kingdom of God in any of our cities across Europe. And we realized that unless we embed, kind of a word we don't use a lot, maybe a splinter getting in your finger and it's embedded, and it's a bad analogy because then it gets all infected and pussy, and who wants that? But embed, how do you dive into a culture as a learner, learning its history, learning its what is the history of the church? Is it good or bad in that area? What are the political ramifications? What are the societal, viewpoints? And embed. Find a doctor. Stuff you got to do, to live, a place for your kids to go to school. You just kind of embed. And we view that as a bit impersonal. You're kind of an observer. It can be personal, but it's a little bit distant. And then through the embedding that you do, the good embedding that you do, you start to initiate. You start to initiate a conversation. Hey, my name's Phil. What's your name? Dave. Okay, I've initiated that. We started to dive in. And then you have levels of initiating. You got some pretty impersonal contact information exchange initiating. But it could be, what was faith like for you growing up in your family? Now that's still an initiation, but that's a much more personal initiation. Or, hey, what's your email and mobile? Can we connect again? That's still initiating, but that's a little bit more personal. And so we have these levels of initiating. And as you do that, as you embed and you get familiar with an area, you get a couple of names, you frequent a cafe on a regular basis, you start initiating, you're talking 35, 50, names, stories, parts of relationship being developed. Well, maybe now you can think about gathering. Not yet church, just gather. Hey, let's get together and go clean up this area of the city. Hey, let's get together and talk about, explore issues of faith. Hey, let's get together and coach a team, some sort of regular gathering. Maybe it's Tuesdays afternoons in basketball, or maybe it's Thursday nights and a dinner party, but it's some sort of regular gathering. And you start multiplying those gatherings with people of faith and some leadership capacity, kind of taking some leadership, but not alone. Not even a benevolent dictator, which is it's actually easier than working with a team, but the team will push you forward if you'll go a little bit slower. And if you can resist, because let me tell you how strongly people with a Christian faith and kids want church. They want it bad, okay? And they don't want it for missional purposes. They want it for care. And they want it for their own security. And they want it for their own discipleship and growth and development. And while we are here for that, we are here for that from the pagan culture. That they would bump into Jesus and find him tasty and chew on him for a while and decide, I want to surrender leadership of my life to him. We'd like to see some of that going on in church. We'd like for some of the leadership development, the pre-conversion discipleship that we're doing, to translate into a life of faith. And when we have enough of that going on, like maybe 50 people, 35 adults, when you have, a Jewish concept that we've lost sight of is 10 heads of households. Do you realize that a synagogue could not be started until there were 10 heads of households committed to Yahweh, that they could gather and be claimed as a synagogue. Otherwise, they were just this other thing. Well, what if we did that? Do we have 10 heads of households, along with all the other people attached to those heads? Then that's about 50 people, maybe more. Well, now maybe we can think about worshiping, we can think about mission, and we think about community on a regular basis, in a regular location, happening for this large group of people who still are embedding and initiating and gathering throughout the life of the church. But once this church beast gets up and going, it can swallow everything. Bill Beckham wrote a great book, The Second Reformation, about this bird whose one wing was massive and the other wing was just dwindling. What does a bird look like if one wing isn't working? It flies around in a circle. And isn't that what church does? It gets started, it gets launched, we are missional, and then something happens. We start focusing on ourselves. So if we can keep the embedding and the initiating and the gathering going, we think that we could not only start churching, but we think we could start hubbing. Church saturation planting in a local area, bringing some people in to taste and see what's happening, and go. And if we do that well, then maybe we could start extending the kingdom of God regionally, nationally, continentally, in my case Europe, and nationally Portugal, and globally. And if we do that, then what could God do with a little bit of fish and some loaves of bread? I don't know.